Welcome, everyone. This is YiFeng. Welcome to Watching Silent Films, and where we pick a feature or a series of shorts, silent movies, and we watch it and we talk about it on this podcast. Welcome, Lily, and welcome, Bob, my co-host.
Hello.
Hello, guys.
Greetings. At the time of this recording, I always have to say that because these are often published much later. So by the time people get around to it, they might understand where things are. But at the time of this recording, we're going through this COVID-19 ordeal, so we're kind of just going in and out of that. But I think at this point, a lot of people are sick of talking about it. So let's move on.
You're here.
Yeah. Any of you have watched anything in the classic realm? I don't think I have myself. I've been busy doing other, actually non-movie watching stuff.
I mean, yesterday, my brother and I watched The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. It doesn't quite qualify. It's a little too modern, but...
Well, that's before Star Wars, so I
Yep.
classify that as classic because...
Oh, okay.
Well, the reason
So Star Wars is the bar, huh?
I think so. You know, part of my reasoning behind that is because it's kind of based on my experience, in the sense that when I have conversations with movie fans from all walks of life,
Right.
they often have seen Star Wars, and they know what Star Wars is because it's extremely popular, but they also know a lot about 80s and 90s movies. I think at least the older generation. I think, Lily, you're kind of you might know a little bit about that too, especially in the 90s movies, but you probably know a lot about the 2000s and 2010 movies as well.
But, yeah, potentially. I mean, I know The Good and the Bad, the Ugly, because that's Clint Eastwood. I know a lot of his films just from watching it growing up. I'm trying to think. I don't think I watched any film this week besides, the rewatching the movie again. I mean, I watched assorted TV shows on Netflix. I don't really binge watch because my friends were like, "Oh, check out this show, Tiger King. That's a really
Oh, no,
great."
no.
Yeah. I've only seen episode 1.
Uh-huh.
I'll stop
my
right
goodness.
there. So
Yeah.
I see, that's pretty much the only thing I really watched besides just doing some school work and watching the videos correlating to that, because that's been my focus. But, someone's like, "You gotta watch this." I'm like, okay, let me watch it. So,
But I think you
Yeah.
you kind of get where I'm getting at, which is it's kind of movies that you grew up with and you're more familiar with. And I know for my generation, we grew up in a lot of the 80s, 90s movies. And so when we watch a TV movie that pays homage to that, that Netflix series, what's it called? Stranger Things.
Oh, right.
Like, when you watch that, you're like, wow, there's a lot of 80s stuff in here.
Oh, yeah.
And for
Absolutely.
me, I lived through that, so I was like, oh, everything's
I know.
totally relatable, right?
It's very fun.
Yeah. But also when I was growing up, and I can't 100% relate to this, but I know people who are older than me who grew up in the 70s when they watched the Wonder Years, very similar ordeal, where, when you watch that, you're like, wow, this is like a recall of,
Exactly.
very similar, right?
It takes you right back.
Exactly. Anyways, where was I going with this? Oh, that's why I picked Star Wars, because it encompasses so many of the movie fans that I speak with, and when I have these reference points about movies, modern movies, they will have a higher probability of knowing these movies post Star Wars. But anytime I delve into movie titles prior to Star Wars,
You get the blank look.
not always. Good, Bad, Ugly, of course, is huge, right?
Right.
But, sometimes I would mention Lawrence of Arabia, which to me is an amazing piece of film, right?
You know what's funny is that I gave my brother the choice of Lawrence of Arabia or The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly.
Well, there you
The
go.
next movie we're going to watch is Lawrence of Arabia.
There you go. Hey, well, when the whole by the way, for the audience listening, if you maybe decades down the road, hopefully it's still around. We're in a lockdown now, so generally we can't. The recommendation rather is not we don't go out and kind of spread the virus and stuff like that.
Right.
So, but the point is that when this is lifted, I highly recommend when you have a chance to check the 70 millimeter presentation of it in Somerville. They have a 70 millimeter festival in. Used to be in September. I think they moved it in May. Of course, all of that's all gone now and canceled. But when hopefully they'll be back in business, and when they are, I've seen Arabia in 2001 at least 2-3 times through the 70 millimeter festival. But they often will bring out incredible prints like Sleeping Beauty. That was originally drawn on 70 millimeter and filmed using 70 millimeter film. So it's incredibly sharp animation, incredibly sharp resolution, live action. So highly recommended.
Definitely.
Yeah.
That sounds like a lot of fun.
I mean, for me, even though I have a front projector and 100-inch, I still have a hard time watching Lawrence at home because I've seen it so many times in the massive, ginormous screen.
Mm-hmm.
So
you spoiled yourself.
I mean, that's a movie that you just almost can't, So I know it's really, really hard and tough to watch that Lawrence of Arabia on the small screen. But the bigger, the better, of course. So, anyways, let's keep moving here. Yeah, so that's why I often will pick that line of the Star Wars pre and before, and I
gotcha.
mean, also anytime I talk about black and white and non-widescreen movie, like people just that's when you get the majority blank stare. Some people will be open to that, but a big chunk of the times it's like that.
Gotcha.
Anyways, and also. That era, I mean, 77, 80, that's 20, 30, that's about 40 years now. Almost 40, in a few more years, it'll be 50 years. If you think about it. That's quite
that's going pretty... Yeah, yeah, you're right. Now I feel old.
Long time.
Now I feel old. Because I went and saw Star Wars 4 times at the movie theater.
There you go. So.
Maybe more than that. I saw it 3 times in 1 week in the movie theater.
Yeah.
Sorry, I saw it 3 times in 1 day at the movie theater.
There it is. It's impactful, movies like
that.
Yeah.
It was. Yeah. Anyway.
I don't know if we'll have any movies like that ever again. I don't think to that degree. But
hard to say, yeah.
But there are many movies like that in film history. Not the one we're going to talk about today. But so today we're going to talk about Alice Guy Boucher's The Birth, Life, and Death of Jesus Christ. And it is about a 40-minute short where Alice Guy Boucher was inspired by James Tissot. I think that's how you pronounce his name.
Tissot?
Yeah. And
it's French.
He's an artist who late 1800s through I think the early 1900s, and his career was started when he started to paint sort of clothing because one of his parents was in the clothing business and one of them was in something else, and I remember. But so he was intimately familiar with how clothing and styles of clothing and colors worked on a human being. And with that intimate knowledge, he studied art in Paris under a bunch of artists, and there's a lot of stories. But long story short, the artist James Tissot would eventually come to find fame when he moved to London and started paint, the Victorian people who are in Victorian sort of, clothes, the latest fashion. But he would paint them with such vivid imagery, again, because of his familiarity with the fashions of the day. So due to his background with his family, one of his family is parents in the fashion business, he had already a keen eye, and when he painted this stuff, it was just super impactful, I think, and a lot of people really enjoyed his the way that he was able to bring all of that styles out and the details out. So I think that's his claim to fame. I think.
Very interesting, because definitely checking out some of his other artworks besides the like the Passions of the Christ and the Ecce Homos he painted. They were very detailed and they were really beautiful. I like the colors he chose. Just everything. Yeah, just everything from knowing all that knowledge. Oh yeah, said it so smart right there.
Yeah. Yeah. So that was his kind of early career. I don't know if people even back then felt that was a serious art. I mean, it was kind of commission work that got him paid by various people who have portraits painted. Next to still photography, paintings were something that people still paid money for, as part of their capturing a moment in time, right? Just next to their photography. People used to do that. People don't do that nowadays, generally speaking. So, at least the average Joe. But it was, I think, he got more notice by painting stuff like Faust. We talked a little bit about that because we had Alex Boucher did some version short of the Faust story, and he depicted some scenes of that, and I think it won some awards or something. It got him notice, and then he started to mature more, and there's more stories to that, but because he had some Catholic background in a couple of years before, right around the same time when the Lumiere brother demoed their technology in 1895, probably a decade before that, roughly. Tissot had this like revival somehow. He claims I'm not totally skeptical. I just don't know because I'm not him and I wasn't there. But he claims that he had a vision. So he's another artist, just like if you guys read poetry like Blake, I think Wordsworth I can't remember which one, but there's a bunch of poets in the latter half of the millennium, I guess, that would often claim that they had visions and that caused them incredible pain until they wrote out the poetry and that created the art. That's a common thing. I think a lot of some poets do it. Blake is the one I can think of, but there's probably others. I didn't really remember them now. And this artist, in a similar vein, got this inspiration, and so when that happened, he got basically recommitted or reconverted back to his Catholic faith, and when he did that, he just almost cold turkey, I would say, was basically like, I'm gonna stop doing everything I'm doing artistically and start focusing on like the Bible and the biblical stories and like how to bring that into his art, his talent that God has given him, essentially. So he ended up traveling to the Middle East, 3 trips in around 1886, 1889, and 1896, and he took still photography and sketches, really incredibly rough sketches. So he wasn't like physically in the land painting these things, but he was there doing research, asking questions, taking photography, taking pictures of people, doing a ton of sketches. And he's basically doing background research and study in these 3 trips over there. And once he completed all that, he would come back, and in his private study, he would then create these incredibly beautiful drawings and paintings. What's called I don't know how you pronounce this, gouache, or it's basically an opaque watercolor.
Gouache.
And he created
Gouache.
Yeah, I don't know pronounce that, but it's he created 365 watercolor illustrations of the birth, life, and death of Jesus.
Wow!
And when he completed that, people were his artistic fellow artisans, sort of like, are you real? Because they knew his life, his former life. And his former life was one of, when he was painting the other ladies' clothes and other things, he may have, I didn't get into details, but the implication, he's probably lived a artistic life, which means that maybe he was, there was a certain lifestyle associated, and then people were like shocked that he would kind of turn to religion. It's like, wow, like that's not the person I knew. They were incredibly
Right.
skeptical of his conversion, right?
Of course.
And long story short, once it was completed, he started to hold what's that word in the museums, to have showings, viewings, or
Oh, yeah, showing's a good word.
yeah, I forgot the word.
I know what you're talking about. For an exhibit, yeah.
Yeah, so you would have
That's
a
it.
series. Exhibition, that's what it was. So exhibits of his artwork. So he started doing that in Paris. He did stuff in London, and towards the end of his life, he did the one in New York. Now, at that time, Brooklyn Museum in New York City had just got started, and they didn't really have stuff that they owned. They would pay money and have collections on loan, but ultimately, they were so inspired. The people that on the board that was running Brooklyn Museum at that time, turn of the century, in 1900, was like, we gotta buy this. So they collected sort of offerings from the local, both people and organizations, business, everything, and they bought the whole collection. So, as far as I know, I didn't really look too far ahead, but that collection's still at the Brooklyn Museum to this day, as far as I know.
Wow.
And it was like a permanent exhibit for about 30, 40 years, and then it went into the archives for preservation. And I don't think it's been trotted out unless for special occasions or something, but hasn't really had any exhibitions to the degree that it was in the early part of the 1900s. And the reason I know all this is because I borrowed this book from the library. That's what it's called. The Life of Christ collection, and it's published by the Brooklyn Museum, and it gives you the entire scope and history of this whole thing, and it has all the most the best pristine glossy paper, high quality reprints, and some background histories of all of the 365 watercolors, and they're all incredibly beautiful.
Wow.
So the reason for this is the background is because this book is the inspiration, and I think I talked to Lily last week before about this, but it's almost like the storyboard for the movie. Mm-hmm. And at this point, if you listen to last week's podcast, Alice was really good with shorts, so she's incredibly good with taking really short subjects, doing a very quick not a sketch, but a quick snapshot of what that idea or concept is. She's really good with doing that. And I think this is almost like a perfect marriage of the two mediums in that she took... by the way, and another feeling in the background is that during those exhibitions, there was a publishing... They basically did the same publishing of all of his watercolors. There's a French edition in 1896 and an English edition in 1897-ish, 98. And that's what brought him vast wealth and fame. So he was one of the few artists that maybe, I don't know, that got the wealth and fame during his life. And he got the Legion d'Honneur. I forgot how you pronounce that. But
The Legion of Honor.
Yeah, it's the Legion of Honor and the prestigious medal.
Amazing.
Yeah, so...
Yeah, that is really cool.
Yeah, so that's the whole background, and of course, Alice Keys is the person that physically got this book and was like, "Oh, this would make a incredible whatever." And I'm sure she must have been sort of thinking about it until she started making movies, and in time, she was like, "This, we gotta do this," and she did it, and so that's the result is the movie, which is essentially taking the storyboard of the watercolors and kind of painting it with motion picture. So I wish that there was still photography that was color, or at least could be colorized from the era. We can't see in the black and white, but I'm wondering if she actually did authentic costumes with the various incredible colors. Because the big thing about James Tissot's painting is that the colors are so rich of symbolism, of just so much detail because he did the primary research. Like he was one of the few artists who actually went to the actual location of what all these histories of things that happened, and also one of the few artists. I tried to do some research on this, and I don't know for sure, but a lot of the traditional portrayals of Christ is just the pasty white man, when in reality, like racially, he's actually a Iraqi Jew or something like that. Like he's much darker brown, and his hair is curly, and it's
he's Israeli.
Yeah.
So.
Well, that's the DNA research, anyways. So long story short is that it doesn't really look a lot of like the paintings that we often see, especially with the Renaissance artists, of the pasty white guys. I call them pasty white guys, but you get the idea. It's like this very perfected imagery of what this person is, which is localized. Every culture localizes kind of Christ in their drawings.
Right.
But of course, the Renaissance era was one of the most popular, well-known worldwide, historically, of what the arts could be. If you look at the portrayals of Christ in that, it's often just the standard white guy with the long hair and all that stuff.
I know, stupid image, but
long story short, why I'm filling that background is because this artist, because he did the research and he took all that back, he's one of the ones that didn't do that. He did it with realism, so that Jesus was Arabic, and all the people that were in the settings, if you look at all the drawings, were very, very much of that facial structure, of that type, of that like sort of background. It wasn't just kind of whitewash, as it were, to that culture of both the French and the English culture that he often would frequent.
Yeah, he wanted the authenticity.
Exactly. So his paintings will often be like that. And so that's another thing. I mean, you'd have stories of regular people visiting these museums and just breaking down on the floor crying because there's so much impact that the art would give to the people who are just viewing the pictures during the exhibits. Where am I going with this? Oh, so long story short, that's what the background of the book the Alice Cooper got, and ultimately she adapted into the 40-minute or so film that we ultimately got to see.
That we just watched, yeah.
So there were, I would say, about 70% of the shorts does correlate to a specific watercolor, because I have the complete set and actually try to find them all. And there's probably about a handful of the ones were inferred, like they took two sort of watercolors and kind of made a conjecture, I would say. But I would say a majority of them were basically like the painting come to life.
Wow.
Very cool.
So one, I wish there was a colorized still of something that I could see, because I gotta imagine she did some wonderful color with the costumes or something like that. That, of course, is long gone. Even if there were color stills, it'd be long gone by now. Lost to time or whatever.
Right.
So that's my background for it. So what do you guys think about all of them? There was at least 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 16, 18, about 20 to 20-ish sections that or so.
I thought it was well done. I mean, I liked. I thought the amount of work at the time, was something, like all the sets and costumes. I thought, okay, they did a good amount of work for that. I don't know whether she made any money on it or even intended to, but they put a lot of work into it.
Yeah, you can definitely tell, because I was admiring just the angel wings that they had constructed. And wings are kind of a hard, or not even hard, they're a trickier item to make, even though they're on your back, because you have to make sure they're parallel, they won't move, because you jostle your background. Just thinking of in the costume respect. And she had different designs for them. Some stuck up, some stuck out.
I didn't even think about that.
Yeah, so I was just curious to know how her team had created them, if she, whatever type of team she had. And I just wanted to make a comment about how, she in the respect that she probably did do everything so authentic to the paintings too, because it's Alice Guy Blaché. She just just seeing her stuff, she seems like definitely the person to want to do it justice and do it correctly. So I can definitely see her trying to get all the costumes and colorations correct. That's just my opinion. But just from watching Be Natural and hearing her life, I'm just like, no, there's no way she would have, like, fluffed it. She would have gone all in. But yeah, that was just something I found interesting with the angel wings. And after watching it, so right now at the time of this recording too, it's going to be Easter 2020 this weekend, and I'm Catholic, and I was raised Catholic, so I actually kind of learned a bit more watching it the second time, in a weird sense. Like, later on when Jesus is crucified and the Roman stabs him in the ribs, I actually never knew why Jesus had that mark. Because I have, I have a cross in my house with Jesus, and he's got that wound. I was like, what? I never really knew what it was from. And even though, you go to Easter Sunday and Good Friday, you listen to all the scriptures, it's just like, I mean, you're there, but you're not really with it. So, for me, even though it's still brutal to watch it, even if it's silent, I learned why he got some of his markings. At least that one. I don't really know.
You want to tell the listeners what it is, so they're not guessing?
Oh, what do you mean? Like the crucifixion itself?
No, the mark on.
Yeah, you were just
telling
us how you found out about it, but you didn't tell the audience what it was specifically. Yeah.
So Jesus has on the cross, on all the crosses that he's on, he's got this mark on his lower right side of his rib cage. It's like a slash mark, and in just the cross I own, it's kind of bleeding, but I never knew why. So he gets stabbed by the Roman's pike. Yep. I think because he's checking if he's dead, which he is.
Exactly.
Jeez.
Yep.
So, I mean, my interpretation of this film is I learned something. Even though that's not really what I should say. But another interesting story I learned was the resurrection of Gyros' daughter. I don't know anything about that. I wasn't sure if that was legit or not, because it was very close to the Lazarus story.
It is, but yeah, he raised a little girl from the dead as well. She was bigger in that scene that I envisioned from the Bible story, but
yeah, it's because it's again everything is the tableau, right? From the watercolor.
Yeah,
it's so much just something from. I mean, some of the sections are, for example, like the baby sleeping Jesus. I couldn't find a correlating watercolor, so that's probably something for her mind. So that was quite interesting.
Yeah.
But other than things like that, I say majority of the major events, like the crucifixion, all those things, are basically, if you see the watercolor framing, it's essentially going to be framed like that in the film. So. But yeah, I mean, if you read through the Gospels in the Bible, I mean, Jesus himself has raised Lazarus, girl, and then it just a trail of people being resurrected from the dead. So it's not just a few people, and even post resurrection, the saints came back, was resurrected too. It's just the power of, the picture that's painted in the Bible is the power of him that just would resurrect people left and right. So, I quite enjoyed it because it's one of the first adaptations. It's not the very first, of course. It's very hard to say first, like we keep talking about in silent films. But the earliest one was something like 1890 something, or it's one of the first subjects people like to tackle just for 5 minutes or something. So that's been done before. A lot of the I think one of the things about this movie is, like all film history movies, is it's hard to understand it because you need a lot of context. And it's typical of the movies of this time because it's still coming from an early experimental era. And the language of film to tell a story, it's still really challenging and hard. and people were still figuring things out. And this movie is no different. It's not like there was a complete narrative. The only difference with this particular movie and movies like this from this era is because, especially this particular subject, is because people know already or are so familiar with the life of Christ himself. In a sense, it's very culturally known, I think. And so you can infer a lot into the picture, if that makes sense. You can infer the story, you know? So when you're watching it, you're not asking, like, why is that guy poking the stick at Jesus' like chest? I don't understand. Like, or, you know, like. So I think story-wise, there's a lot of reading in instead of reading out. Whereas a lot of more modern movies, post-1920s, that we saw, like even Dr. Caligari, you didn't really have to know it was a silent film. You could tell just by watching it out what the story is, you know, because the film language from 1900 to 1910 has evolved in 1910 to 1920 by leaps and bounds, right? It essentially, you didn't need historic context generally to be able to watch a movie out of context, but still be able to get the story and the gist of what they're going for. But movies like this one are still in that realm of, it's an early movie. It's really hard to piece together the thread. And yes, while we understand it is the story of Jesus, which a lot of people know because it's the Western culture, it's really difficult to...
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
Yeah. Go ahead.
No, sorry. I was just like, well, that was just a note I had. Everyone more or less would have known the tale of Jesus and his demise. I mean, I don't really know all cultures and what they believe in. They know of Jesus. But that was just something I was thinking about while watching this film. Even if you didn't really understand it, I think it's kind of well known who Jesus was and what he did. I mean, he's the bringer of Christianity, so...
It's very well, yeah. It's a popular tale.
I would say the Western culture, yes. So if you've got, you know, certainly Europe, obviously because of so much of the religious background and history, I would say a lot of the colonized world, a lot of the Latin America certainly, just the West in general, modern West, I would say there's a lot of cultural understandings of that story. But as you move, and even Africa is so, it had traditionally been proselytized so much that it's big chunks of Africa is basically, you know, Christianity too. So they all understand that. But if you start moving towards the east, which is, you know, where I grew up, in the Far East, very few people actually have, I mean, they've heard the name, certainly. But if you ask them the story, they couldn't tell you any of the stories. They just, over there, it's less than 0.01% Christian or something.
Wow.
Because it's largely true. Eastern religion. And so, you know, like, not this movie, but like The Passion of the Christ, when that came out in 2004 or something like that.
Yeah.
Well, you know, if you remember that movie, very little dialogue. In fact, it was kind of like a silent film, right? It was basically the torture. And then that was it. So.
You mean The Passion of the Christ by...
The Mel Gibson movie.
Mel Gibson, yeah.
So
I thought that was terrible.
Yeah, I agree. I actually agree. So think about it from their perspective, the people in the Far East, right? And this is why I personally think it's not as well done as it could have been, is because, for one thing, if you have less than 0.0 whatever % people who don't know anything about the story of Western sort of background culture, and then you start watching this movie, it's like the first question you're gonna be like, I don't understand. Who is this Jesus?
Right.
And there's no
Who's
dialogue.
Jesus?
It's all like ancient Latin or dead language that nobody knows somewhere, some Aramaic, some language.
Yeah.
And it's like subtitled a little bit, but you're like inferring a lot. Like the West, right? They know about his story, so a lot of the stories of Jesus and what he did is totally inferred and read into. And all of a sudden you see this guy just getting beaten and, you know, flesh torn, and all of a sudden he's dead, he's on the cross, and
they're like,
something
what?
happened,
Why is
he
getting
woke up.
beaten up.
I don't understand. Like
right.
that's the problem I have with it, is like my relatives, who some of them have seen it, I talk to them and they're like, I don't understand it, and they're not Christians, right?
Right.
I don't know, like it doesn't make it. There's no context. There's no. It makes zero sense without context or story or
Right.
framing or any of those things. So I think.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Give
the
me
reason why
the money back.
the reason why I'm bringing some of that back is because it's in a similar way. The birth and life of like this particular short, I think, is effective for the West even back then. But I would say if you start to, and they did show silent movies everywhere, including the Far East. It's the same story over there. I'm sure is like, if you got a silent film playing over there, unless you had that. I'm gonna forget the term now. I gotta look it up later. But there's this person who's narrating the film. That's gonna be the person that'll translate culturally what this film and meaning significance is. Because back then, especially in Japan, there would often be a person who would actually narrate what's going on the screen culturally, a literal cultural translator that would perform the movie for you for almost all the silent films,
Very interesting. Didn't know that about different cultures.
Yeah, because think about it. If you were in Japan, like, what do you know about America? At least back in that time when the early
very
silent
true.
films
You're
started.
like, well, there's an ocean in between us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they had to translate. If, like, for example, if they watch The Birth of the Nation, who's the Ku Klux Klan? I don't get this. It's
Why are the North and South fighting?
Right.
What?
So
What are they doing?
Why are they
Who's
dressed
this
like
chick?
ghosts?
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. It's just like, oh yeah, because that's not their history either. So why would they care? Why would they know?
Exactly. It's called a benshi. Found it. I'm sure that's not how it's pronounced, but
It's called what?
benshi, BENSHI, and they kept silent films alive well into the 50s because the audiences loved the cultural translation. So even if the talkies started in the 30s and 40s and 50s, they still relied heavily on these performers. And at one time, there was like 10,000 of these performers across the country explaining films to audiences. But that's totally aside.
Whoa.
We can talk about that in the Japanese silent films. Back to the topic at hand, which is this particular film. I just have a few comments. I think some of the staging is like hammy. It's very theatrical acting, which is almost to be expected in that realm and time. Not the standard, but a lot of the productions tend to hire theater people. And certainly given her background and a lot of the shorts, they hired performers from local theaters. Like, where else would you get talents, And recorded it. And so that's often, I think, you can see the gestures. And Lily, you have that theater background. I'm sure you noticed that all the players.
Yeah, some of them were very.
Yeah.
Boom.
Yeah. But again, they didn't know any better. They were still figuring things out and experimenting. And at this point, I don't think they had close-ups, especially in the way that this
No, I was
movie
just thinking that too. There weren't any close-ups in this movie.
Because it was more tableau. It was supposed to be the adaptation of those watercolors, and that's kind of the point that she was trying to make. I will say, though, that the sets are amazing. When it extends the set into very far off, like all the painted sets, you could see it's like it veers off into incredibly extensions, really long backgrounds, I would say. So all those are, I think, really cool. There was a scene, and by the way, in the original James Tissot's watercolors, it wasn't just 100% based on the Bible. It was a lot inspired by apocryphal stuff too, and also legends and myths that may or may not be true. So it wasn't just like, I'm going to stick to whatever's canon. He certainly was inspired by a lot of stuff. And so I think elements of that made it into this short as well. Because there were definitely things in here that wasn't just like from the Bible. There was just a lot of other things going on. There's a particular scene where somebody, as Christ is carrying the cross, in the scene on the left part of the frame, somebody lifted up a barrel and was going to throw it at Jesus, and one of the Roman guards was like, all right, calm down, put that down. I thought that was hilarious. I just noticed that, the corner of my eye. So, like, I pointed it out because it's so detailed, right? Even though it's a tableau, small little details like that, it was, to me, kind of great sort of attention paid to this very small things. I thought the intertitles were really well done. don't know how it was done, but it was all the intertitles came up really well. And something that I noticed, two things is that there were a lot of women in this particular adaptation. I just feel like that was by design. I don't know if the other ones, the ones I've seen, I don't think there were a lot of them, but certainly in this one, like the woman that was following the mother, but also Mary Magdalene, as well as any number of other women, they're just kind of trailing along, kind of following through the narrative. I thought that was significant. I would say that's got to be unique to this particular adaptation.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
I understand as well. It's someone has pointed out to me that in the Bible tales, when they talk about male dominance as something that Christianity, professes, and one person pointed out once when I was listening to a lesson that the women in the Bible are generally portrayed as very strong characters. And I thought it's kind of good, as I was watching this movie, that the women were so, dominating a lot of the scenes.
Yeah, they were important and they were significant.
Yeah,
it wasn't just like a side character. It wasn't like a useless thing. It was like they were critical to some of the narratives of the story, as it was in scripture and as it was, I think, painted too. Even James.
Well, when he was walking through the town, and when he was, going through the town to his crucifixion, in most of the scenes you see the women, following behind, almost like they're leading the crowd.
Right. Was also a lot of children too, portrayals of children.
I noticed that,
yeah.
and I thought when I was thinking about the direction of the film, like when you're trying to set the mindset, and you're doing a production and you're trying to train the kids to do their roles properly, I would think you'd have to say to them, like, anyone that's dressed like a soldier with a helmet and uniform, you gotta almost kind of like be afraid of them.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, because on an acting note, dealing with kids is hard too, just because you have to just break it down so much, no matter what, I don't know if it's film or theater. I don't know. It's like you can't dumb it down for them, but you have to be like, okay, you got to do it this way. You know what? I don't know how to explain it without saying it like, dumbing it down. But
Right.
because it's for kids.
Yeah, I'd like to see that sometime.
On a separate thing I noticed too was that I thought it was interesting how one of the apostles, thinking of when the Judas betrays him scene.
Yeah.
One of the apostles rips a man away from Jesus, from the mob, and he helps him back up as they carry him off. I was just like, what? I had to watch that clip twice.
That was Jesus himself.
Yeah, but one of the mob men had grabbed Jesus. One of the apostles pulled him off, and then Jesus was like, no, because he's supposed to be.
Right.
It's all prophesied. I just thought it was funny because I was just like, what? He's helping the man up? Oh, Jesus, don't do that.
Yep. He helps him back up and then turns to carry the cross again. Like, wow.
Just like,
Judas, I don't know if you know, was wearing this vertical column robe.
Yep.
I noticed that.
Basically, like, stood out because
they wanted him to stand out a bit. Yeah.
Yeah. Even in scripture, you often will read the passage of like Judas Iscariot, someone who betrayed Jesus. So it's like in the text, it's totally stood out. In James Tissot's watercolor, totally stood out there. And of course, in her adaptation, like she had to make a artistic choice to have him stand out amongst all the other disciples in a specific costume. And we know who he was at all times in all the scenes. So that was interesting.
How many other scenes was he in? I only noticed him at the Last Supper, and then after.
Any of the disciple ones where they're all gathered together, yeah, it wasn't just the betrayal, but just throughout the last few. There's 25, I think, sections,
okay.
and the last few for sure. He's been in almost all of them. I thought that Alice Cage was perfect because she, up to this point, I didn't really look this up, but I didn't see that she did a long narrative yet, and at this point, it's probably the longest I think she's done. But it was still a series of shorts, so it wasn't like this long connected narrative. Even though the story she was doing is a single narrative, but she still took it up in chunks, right?
Yeah.
So it was perfect for her experience, what she had already been doing, and kind of splicing all the different shorts together into a single collection of tableaus. So I thought that was interesting. What do you guys think of the music at the end? It was
I loved the music all the way through.
There was a recurring theme too. I thought that was.
I loved the movie. That was when I mentioned to my brother when I watched it. I said that was the thing that stood out to me a lot. Was the music was beautiful.
See, I'm telling you, it's the YouTube stuff is okay, but it's often the music will lift it out of that sort of obscurity of still image, you know.
One of the songs that was recurring, it is from church, but I don't know what it's called exactly because I knew the melody right away. It's like, oh. But sometimes I felt that it was placed at the wrong point because they used that song earlier on, and then when Jesus was going to Golgotha, the place where he gets crucified, and I was just like, I don't think that's really an appropriate melody to be playing now because the song's very uplifting. So I don't know, that was just my thought. I was like, they should have played the song now.
I think he's just trying to play a motif that this is Christ, what he's doing, and this is his mission, his passion, and all that stuff. He's trying to keep the same thing from start to finish. So it's hard to do a score off of a series of shorts like this.
That's
because
true.
there's no. It's hard to have a through line, even though in the original story there is one, but in the way that this is adapted, it's a series of tableaus essentially. It's almost just like still photography in some ways, you know. So, but yeah, I thought it was through those things that we pointed out was great set, great costume, acting of its time. It's definitely a product of its time. The tableaus are amazing. All the framing is good. Music is, I think it was this guy's got to be somebody new. It can't be an original score. Yeah, this is somebody recent. He's still alive. So he's basically doing a new take on something that's an old movie. So it's a sort of like a modern take, I guess. Interpretation of what it could be from the olden times. But at least there's some effort made. So, any other?
Well, one of the things I noticed
Go ahead.
in the overall production is the name seemed to be a little incorrect. In that it seemed like the birth, life, and death of Christ was. It seemed like the amount of time spent was only a few clips on his birth and life, and most of the film was actually from the time he was arrested through his crucifixion. So it really wasn't the last 3/4 of the film seemed to be more about the last few days of his life than his life itself. They did a few things like the Samaritan, and raising the girl, and maybe one or two other things, but I was like, they quickly moved into his trial and then crucifixion, which I thought, oh wow, they're moving really fast on this. And it appeared they were moving really fast, but then they were very detailed about everything from his trial on.
Yeah, that's because it's reflecting again the watercolor, which is it's
Oh.
percentage-wise made that way too. It
Gotcha.
it has a large focus on crucifixion and resurrection and stuff, which
Gotcha.
in my opinion there should be, right? In some ways. And also like the budget of its time. I don't think they had the money to do the whole entire 365 you know, it would be cost prohibitive, so that's I think
Gotcha.
why he or she focused on what she could at that time, which is why
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
I see what you're saying. I guess I felt like maybe they could have taken a little bit out of the detail of the trial to show a little bit more about his gathering the disciples and for example, like showing I don't know whether that artist that she was going from covered that in his work. So I don't know whether the root work she was working from covered that.
A big chunk of it did focus on towards the tail end, I would say.
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
Some in the middle, but definitely a larger focus. A big percentage of it was on that point forward. Any parting thoughts, Lily? Bob was just talking about that was more focused on towards the arrest and afterwards versus the middle parts. But
yeah. Looking at my notes. I have anything else to?
Oh, Lily is cutting in and out.
Whoop. I thought she paused to think.
Yeah, I think she has some connectivity issues. That's okay. We'll have to see if she can reconnect. Meanwhile, I would say that I just want to keep going on sort of the James Tissot's life. He essentially, towards the end of his life, I think he died in 1902. He didn't really make it too far after 1900. He right when he's got the fame and fortune, I guess. It's because right after the exhibition was done, he actually started to make a sequel, like part 2, for these watercolors, and it was for the Old Testament. So again, he did travel to the Middle East to do extensive research again, and he started. I can't remember how many watercolors he did, but he worked on the Old Testament too.
Did I get cut
Lily,
off
you're
again?
back.
Oh my god, this is like the third
Well,
time.
That's okay.
Welcome back.
Did you get the majority of what I was saying?
No,
Or
it
did
just started to cut out. But you can do it now while you're connected. So go ahead.
Okay. Jeez. No, I was talking about when Jesus was at the whipping post. I was curious to know how they did the blood effect, because I know they didn't have latex back then. They weren't really using
Ink.
whips.
Ink on the whips.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, I'm glad you
They
know.
did CG, Lily, didn't you know?
No, it's not CG.
Early computers in 18... no, I'm just kidding.
In 18. No, this is 1906. Ink. That's really interesting. Huh.
That's only my guess. But I figure it's probably something water soluble, so that it would drip. It was probably something that was like, it was obviously a wet whip,
Yeah.
and with something that would drip down his back to look like blood.
Yeah,
Why not
because
just
later
real
on,
blood, Bob? Just make it real.
I guess it could be chicken blood, yeah.
Just,
Ugh.
I mean, human blood. Just no
Ah!
just straight
Uh,
real stunt.
uh,
I don't think they did that back then. Whoa.
Oh man. Well, who knows? I mean, actually, and this is real life history, is that a lot of not a lot. Well, significant amount of silent stars actually died trying to do stunts.
Oh
So-
yeah, I remember reading that.
Yeah, because it was
watching the
early
videos.
days, and they were like, "What's all the safety stuff? We don't care. Let's make the picture." And so
We don't care.
they
Let's
had
just go
people
for
who
it.
just died. I'm not laughing at people who died, but like they're just like so lackadaisical about stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Like all these people who died was the reason why all these safety rules started to come out, essentially. But that's later. So, yeah. So, well, did you have a finish to the point you were trying to make, or did you already make your point?
No, I was just bringing that up because, I mean, while watching these, it makes you think of how they were creating all the, just the basis of what we have today. Because even when we watched Nosferatu, that was the very basic basis of special effects makeup. And then from there went on to Frankenstein and Lon Chaney and all the makeup artists I watch. And I mean, I don't watch them, but I read about them because I'm into special effects makeup too. So it just, just thinking about how, very, very beginning, what were they doing to achieve these problems, quote unquote problem, and to make it more believable for the audience. So, I mean, that's just really all I wanted to bring up. It's like, how? And then, Bob, you mentioned ink, so I was like, there you go. That's an option. I don't know where you'd get so much ink, but besides a pen. But I was like, I don't know where you get ink besides a pen, but oh well. But it's still a really cool theory.
It's something on the whips, clearly. I was watching that too and saying, that they're using that old gag.
I can't believe I didn't even think of that either when they're beating him. Like, what are they doing to make his blood flow? Oh, it's on the whip. Duh. Not that that's a good thing either, but still very cool. Because you can use the same technique today, technically.
Yep, and they do. When you see a knife cut someone's throat, for example, like they've got the dye on the other side of the blade, so it looks. It's old. It's an old film trick, but I don't think it's used that much these days.
Yeah, nowadays they probably do a prosthetic and have you cut into the prosthetic, or CG, one or the other.
Or CGI, yeah. But,
all right, folks. I was just kind of wrapping up.
The only other thing I'd note that I thought was really cool was when I was watching it, I was noticing like they had various figures in the film that represented a certain class of people, and they had the costumes all very similar, if not identical. Like when the wise men came in and put the gifts down, and they had I don't know who they were. They were like farmers, or they were all dressed identically. Right
You
before
talking about the Magi?
Yeah. And I thought that's interesting, and it was like I think it was done for the audiences, for the ease of the audience to recognize who was doing what. But maybe it came right from the artist. I don't know. I have to see the works.
Yeah, the Magi scenes were definitely lifted from the watercolors. In fact, the way that watercolor is done is that the Magi was like a group of people. It was a large caravan. It was like, yeah, you got the three guys, but also you got like a huge barrage of people, which is why in that nativity scene it was like a huge number of people just coming into the barn, I guess. So yeah, that's all from the watercolor.
And that's my closing thought.
Anything
it's okay.
else?
Mine was blood.
Okay. The last closing that I had was essentially the James Tissot's career. I was starting to tell Bob is that afterwards he continued to get inspired, and he wanted to basically just do the same thing he just did on Jesus, except for Old Testament. And so he started to do the same research, traveled to the Middle East and did research on where things are. And he actually got started on his paintings and watercolors. He made some progress on it, and then he died. So 1902. And that's it. So that was his life.
No kidding. Huh.
Yeah, but even the Old Testament stuff was pretty cool. Like, there's a lot of Adam, Eve, garden creation stuff. It was really well done. I would have liked to see that complete set of that too. But anyways. Yeah. And trivia question, I guess. Not question, but trivia just for trivia's sake, is that Raiders of the Lost Ark, the Ark was based in part by the painting that this guy did for the Ark that he did for the Old Testament.
Ooh.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that I can imagine because they opened that book early in the movie that shows the picture of the Ark.
Yeah.
Was that his work?
Well, not like in the movie, but it was like the art aesthetic design of the actual Ark came from one of his. And not see, I think it's more just like he was one of the artists, not like the.
It was
primary
inspired
artist.
by
one of the many probably that the production design was like, oh, this is really cool, and took that and made it. So. I haven't seen the behind the scenes of the Raiders yet, or not that I remember. I can't.
Yeah, I haven't seen that film in years myself either.
Yeah, it's a very iconic scene, the design too, of the Ark, but also because it is based on research, anyways. Because that's James Tissot himself. He that's what he wanted to do, is do primary research, and I'm sure. I mean, I don't know why you would, I guess, but that film, Spielberg wanted good research on it as well. Take your best stab at what this Ark looks like. Even though it's a wacky adventure story, right? So anyways. Okay, so all in all, interesting tableaus, I think, for the movie. It was enjoyable for what it is, but there's really hard to understand kind of the narrative if you didn't already know what the story is. I would say, which is kind of indicative of the times that this film was made in. So, but still good to watch, because this is one of her great works, I think, if not the greater. I don't really know. I haven't seen the rest of her stuff, but so that's our take, our watch of the Alice Guy Pichet's Birth, Life and Death of Christ. Those different titles, I think. That might just be the painting, but either way, that's the work there. And then you can find more of our stuff on Watching Silent Films, plural.wordpress.com. That's watchingsilentfilms.wordpress.com. If you have any thoughts, comments, and feedback, you can email us at watchingsilentfilms at gmail.com. That's watchingsilentfilms, plural, at gmail.com. Please leave a comment or feedback. Welcome any feedback on the Apple Podcast platform. It would help other silent film lovers to find us as well. And with that, thank you, Lily. Thank you, Bob. And thank you, listeners. We'll talk again next time. Thank you.
Take care.
Good night.
Bye, guys.